Let the record show that we're continuing the case of City and County of Denver versus Lauren Watson. And we have a few legal matters to raise this morning. I think the first question that I wanted to take up this morning is the question of Exhibit A. I was hoping...
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I would like to withdraw from the file the original document marked Exhibit A yesterday and tender to the court the substituted Exhibit A, which I filed with the court this morning, which I have shown to Mr. Davies, and then I'd like to make a brief argument on the admissibility of the exhibit.
Before we hear arguments, I was hoping that we could have some agreement on
I have no objection
what
to
would
its
be
admission.
stricken.
Oh, all right. And I'll just withdraw.
May I see what has been
Yes.
crossed out or...
Oh.
Exhibit A then is admitted and the city rests. Mr. Davies, you have a motion?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Davies. They are all here, Your Honor. Thank you.
Court, please. This time, Your Honor, we would make a motion under Rule 129 of the Colorado Rules of Criminal Procedure, a motion for judgment of acquittal as to both the charges contained in the summons and complaint. I'd like to direct our attention first to, I think, the more obvious one, and that is the one of interference. The testimony of Officer Cantwell was that the man who, if I'm to understand what it is, what interference he's relying on, the only thing that could even remotely be construed to be interference was this statement that while Mr. Watson, after being handcuffed, was being taken out, he attempted to lunge into a melee that was going on with a Mr. Johnson, and in so doing bumped an officer. We have no testimony, no evidence that any other officer was interfered with, felt interfered with, considered himself interfered with. Now, I presume that's what they're talking about. Surely Officer Cantwell isn't suggesting when he drew up these charges that Mr. Watson interfered with his own arrest. I don't know whether that's what he's talking about, but I think that is somewhat stretching the imagination as to the meaning of the words interfere, and would be cumulative with the charge of resistance, certainly. I'm not sure what they're relying on. I don't see any evidence in the case so far that would possibly sustain the charge of interference. And I'd like to turn my attention very briefly, if I may, to the, I think perhaps more difficult question of the motion for judgment of acquittal based on the resistance charge. He didn't resist the arrest for eluding a police officer. He didn't resist the arrest for crossing the sidewalk. We don't know what arrest he was resisting. There's no evidence on it. It's not my burden to prove the city's case. We're prepared to go into court and talk about the substantive crimes of eluding a police officer, of whether he stopped at a crosswalk and so forth. We have to do that. We'll be in court again. But that's not the issue here. The issue is this resistance. Was there a resistance? He wasn't deterred from the performance of his duty. They effected the arrest.
Trial. The City and County of Denver versus Lauren R. Watson.
I'm James Vorenberg. Now that we're halfway through, perhaps it's time to take a brief look not only at the trial, but at the process through which we're seeing this trial. After watching 2 days, you may think it's slow, sometimes even dull, often repetitious. Why can't it be faster? Actually, what you've seen is less slow than the trial itself was. Much of the repetition, the delays, the minor legal points have been edited out. I suppose the answer is that we are committed in this country to a system in which the facts are brought out, first by one side and then by the other, and we rely on the judge and jurors to perform specific but limited functions. It is cumbersome, and it's slow, but ask yourself at each point how it could be speeded up. What would be lost and what would be gained? And if you're impatient, unsympathetic with the adversary system, what alternative means at getting at facts and deciding cases would you prefer? If people are to be able to think about such questions, the criminal trial ought not to be some sort of secret, hidden ritual engaged in only by a few and displayed only in exciting but usually misleading television and movie dramas. The system should be visible. It should be respected where it deserves to be respected, criticized where it deserves to be criticized. In a sense, this is what this 4-day experience is all about. Of course, there are obvious problems in filming a trial, and it's an issue over which the media and lawyers have been at odds for years. Maybe this film will give a broader understanding of the issue. It's striking that there are, to my knowledge, only a few states in which this film could have been made. Getting back to the trial itself, yesterday the prosecution put in its case. Today it's the defense counsel's turn. Before he does that, however, he will try to persuade the judge to end the trial. The prosecution has to make its case without any help from the defendant. So if it is not put in evidence on which the judge thinks the jury could find Watson guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, she can stop it right now. If Mr. Davies were 100% confident and just about that reckless, he could rest his case, put in no evidence of his own. The judge could then take the case away from the jury and dismiss it, or the jury could acquit. But the law does not put that tough a choice up to Davies. He can try out his theory. If he wins on both counts, it's over. If he loses on either or both, he then proceeds to put in his case.
I would agree with the language of the Del Toro case that in the Denver ordinance, the word interfere, in an ordinance proscribing interference in discharge of a police officer's duty, is used in its generally understood meaning of to check, hamper, hinder, disturb, intervene, intermeddle, interpose, to enter in or to take part in a concern of others. So there's no question but what we're not relying on any evidence that suggests that the defendant in this case interfered with his own arrest. So the evidence with respect to interference has to do with Mr. Watson's activities as described by the witnesses with respect to the attempted arrest and the arrest of Mr. Johnson. There's no question but what that's the evidence that we must rely upon. With respect to the resistance charge, however, I think we have to consider that we're talking not about resisting an arrest, although this may be an element, because an arrest is, by definition, part of a police officer's duties. But the ordinance is not drawn so narrowly as to make it an offense only to resist an arrest, but to resist a police officer in the discharge or apparent discharge of any of his duties. So the officer was carrying out the most basic, the most essential of his duties when he attempted, at the very first instance, when he made physical contact with Watson, to try to search his person for weapons. The evidence is that at that time that Watson was struggling. And I think that from that evidence, just taking this much of it alone, I think that a jury viewing that evidence, I think we have a fact situation upon which reasonable men might differ. If there's any evidence upon which reasonable minds might differ, then I feel the court has a duty to deny the motion for judgment of acquittal.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Any rebuttal argument?
Yes, Your Honor, very briefly. We're still back to that one thing. The only act of resistance was when he turned around and Cantwell lost, and then they all jumped in like gangbusters. And they subdued him, and they drug him out of that filling station. And this court cannot, in good conscience, send that set of facts and let that jury speculate on it. Not under the circumstances. I don't believe the court, as a matter of law, can allow this case to go to that jury and allow them to speculate on that, those facts. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, on the question of the motion to acquit on the charge of interference, the evidence in the best light is insufficient to constitute a charge of interference, and the court will specifically find that there is no sufficient evidence of interference to grant the motion. On the charge of resistance, the question, of course, for the court at this point is whether there is prima facie case, whether the evidence in the best light may be interpreted by a reasonable person as constituting resistance. My understanding of the testimony was that the resistance did not go back to anything that occurred at either of the two stops during this traffic 30-mile-an-hour chase, but rather went to the incidents in the filling station. And the testimony in its best light shows that there was, and I would agree that verbal abuse is not enough, but the evidence in its best light shows physical opposition to the officers at the time that they told him that he was under arrest for eluding in the gas station, not at the time he was stopped on the street. Resistance to search, resistance to handcuffing, and in fact a pretty general resistance all the way out to the door. There is sufficient evidence for the jury, and the court will have to deny the motion on that charge. All right. The charge then that the defendant will be required to go forward on is the charge of resistance only. The charge of interference has been dismissed by the court. Now, Mrs. Dondelinga, would you please bring the jury in at this time? I sent Sophie in to answer the phone. It was ringing. Charges, resistance, and disturbance. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me point out to you at this time that as a matter of law, the court has removed the interference charge from your consideration. This charge of interference has been resolved by the court as a matter of law, and the only charge now remaining for your consideration is the charge of resistance. And Mr. Davies will address you and present his case then on this particular charge.
We expect our testimony to show, quite contrary to what you've heard so far in most respects. Our evidence will show that on the morning in question, Mr. Watson, this was the day after Election Day, as you are well aware, Mr. Watson and his wife went out onto the front porch of their house. Mr. Cantwell was parked in his police cruiser in front of the house, and at that time shook his fist at Mr. Watson and said, "It'll be white power now." Mr. Watson and his wife returned into their house. Testimony will further show that Mrs. Watson, who was here, saw Officer Cantwell drive by down California Street after Mr. Watson pulled out here. He pulled into the filling station. Mr. Watson pulled into the filling station. He said to the girl, she'll testify to this, "I think this guy's crazy. I'm going to call Leonard. I'm Leonard. And I am his attorney." He was concerned. There was a struggle. Well, we freely admit there was a struggle. They had Mr. Watson's arm over him like this. He was trying to keep his arm from being, he was struggling to that extent. They then got his arms behind him and were pressuring him up towards his shoulders. He was in pain. There'll be testimony that throughout this thing, another two officers came in, and there were, in fact, 4 officers. There was not much opportunity for Mr. Watson to struggle. They were, in fact, subduing him. That, contrary to what you've heard, according to our witnesses, the verbal abuse was, in fact, from the police officers. The use of the word nigger, the use of the word black bastard. And we think that you'll see that the one remaining charge left, the resistance charge, is clearly without foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Would you call your first witness, please? Would you please step forward so I can put you under oath? Would you step up here and raise your right hand, please? You solemnly swear by the ever-living God that the testimony you're about to present in this cause before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Would you please have a seat?
Would you state your name, please? All right.
I think we'd better have her restate it for the record. I didn't catch it.
Teresa Kefilwe Mpahlele.
Do you want her to spell it, Your Honor?
We can have it spelled, please.
The last name?
All right, why don't you spell your first and last name?
Teresa. The middle name is Kefilye. My last name is Mphahlele.
Mphahlele.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Now, may I, for the sake of simplicity, call you Terry? Thank you. Where do you live, Terry?
I live on 2345 Leiden Street.
2345 Leiden?
Yes.
Are you a native of the United States?
No, I'm not.
Of what country are you a native?
Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now then, Terry, I'd like to direct your attention to the morning of November the 6th, 1968, last year, and ask you if on that date you had an occasion to be at the location of 2835 Welton Street.
Yes, I was.
Do you recognize the man sitting to my extreme right over here?
Yes, very well.
All right. Do you know what he does for a living?
I think he's a policeman.
All right. Did you see him on that day?
Yes, I did.
All right. Now, would you relate to us, please, when you first saw him?
I first saw him as we were leaving Mr. Watson's house, in front of the house.
What, if anything, did this man, Officer Cantwell, do at that time?
As he went by Mr. Watson's house, he slowed down, and his window was rolled down too. And he put up his fist, and he yelled out, "White power."
Now then, what happened then, Terry?
And when he got no reply, he moved on, and we all went back into Mr. Watson's house.
All right. Then what took place?
We
Terry.
went back into Mr. Watson's house and went out through the back door into a car. And as we were going out of the alley, the same policeman went by. And as we were driving out, he came back again through the alley and slowed down and said something to the effect that, "Watson, it looks like you're not going to make your speech today." And then he drove on. And we followed him. We were right behind him. And as we reached 29th out of the alley, he went down 29th up to California and made a left turn. And we watched him until he made the left. And then we turned to the right and went up to Welton Street.
At the alley now, coming out of that alley, do you recall whether or not Mr. Watson stopped before crossing the sidewalk?
Oh, yes, we did. We stopped there for quite a while.
All right.
Until the policeman had reached California Street.
Then you indicate you turned right on 29th to Welton Street. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
All right, would you tell us what happened after that, please?
The policeman was still following us, and he put on his light and his siren, and we stopped. And Mr. Watson got out of his car and went up to him and they exchanged a few words, and then Mr.
Did you
Watson...
hear any of the conversation?
Not at that time, I did
All
not.
right.
And then Mr. Watson came back to his car, and we drove about one more block, and he put on his light again and his siren, and once more we stopped. And Mr. Watson remained in his car until the policeman approached our car to the side, and then Mr. Watson got out of his car, and Mr. Watson inquired, "Am I under arrest?" And he said, "No, I just want to harass." And
Who said, no, I just want to harass you?
That policeman there.
All right. Then what happened?
Then he went back to his car, and Mr. Watson went into the car, and we drove off, and he was still following us until we reached the gas station.
What happened at the gas station then?
At the gas station, we stopped in front of the gas station, and Mr. Watson said, "That policeman is crazy. I think I better go and call my lawyer." He went out of the car and went into the gas station, and the brothers followed him, and I remained in the car. And as soon as he got into the gas station, he got to the telephone and was just picking it up and putting a coin in to dial when that policeman with another policeman jumped on him and grabbed him and started twisting his arms. And then one of the policemen...
Describe the way in which they were twisting his arm.
Both of them were on both sides. And he grabbed Mr. Watson's hand and he wrapped it around his neck, and the other one twisted it around his back, and Mr. Watson was trying to get his hand off his neck so he wouldn't get choked. And they were calling him all kinds of names like, "You black bastard, you son of a bitch," and all those things. And they tried to search him, and then two more policemen, I think they were dressed in street clothes, jumped on Mr. Watson, and all of them started calling him names.
Let me interrupt for just a moment, Terry.
Yes.
Your testimony earlier was that you remained in the car.
Yes.
How did you overhear these?
The door was still open. There was someone at the door who had the door opened. And then when the policeman...
Were they speaking loudly enough? And
yes,
so that you could hear?
they were hollering and screaming. And one of the policemen came up to me and ordered me out of the car and wanted to search me. And he ordered me into the gas station. And when I got into the gas station, the man at the door closed the door and moved on to Mr. Watson and started searching him.
I started what?
Searching him.
This was after Mr. Watson had been handcuffed and subdued?
No, he hadn't been handcuffed yet.
All right. Did he?
And then Mr. Watson dropped a bunch of keys on the floor, and another brother bent down to pick them up, and two policemen jumped on him and had him in handcuffs. During this time, they were still trying to get Mr. Watson in handcuffs also, and finally they did.
You say there were four officers handcuffing Mr. Watson and holding on to him?
Yes.
At any time, did you see Mr. Watson swing at any of the officers or attempt to hit any of the officers or kick any of the officers?
No, he certainly did not.
Did you hear Mr. Watson use any profanity?
No, he did not. And Mr. Watson is a very soft-spoken man. He never raises his voice at anyone. He never did.
Do it.
Your Honor.
Just one moment. Do you need to change the tape? All right, would you go ahead and change the tape? Let's just hold it.
Well, Your Honor, I was going to call the court's attention to the hour, and I'd rather not be interrupted in my cross-examination. I would recommend to the court that this would be a good time to take the noon recess. And
Yeah, I see both attorneys at the bench to go off the record. Do you have an appointment or do you have something that has to go?
I have no objection.
Okay.
I'll accommodate Mr.
Yeah, well, I understand your problems, although I'm anxious to get this moving too.
I appreciate it.
At this time, before we commence cross-examination, we will take a luncheon recess until 2 o'clock. The court will meet at 2. I think I can just tell the jury that we will need the 6 of you back by 2:15. Unless there's anything further, the court will be in recess in this case.
I think the court in this particular case here is really is doing its job. Ms. Weinscheck, I've had her on several different occasions in the other courtrooms, and I've had her on search warrants. I've gone out and got her out of bed 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to sign search warrants, and she's very cooperative with the police department. Every time I've arrested this party, well, this is the first time I've ever arrested him, but every time any other officers had any dealings with him or any of his other group, it's been the same thing. If it was you who was arrested or another person, that would have been it. I mean, this guy, I arrested him on a traffic charge, and it led to newspaper articles, accusations by members of SDS, his group, and this group, and that group against, even after the arrest, they were people down at the police building picketing, saying it was harassment. If I arrest you, it's not harassment. I arrest him, it's harassment. He breaks the law, it's legal. You break the law, it's not legal. Of course, like my wife says, why did you become a policeman? You know, you can't even sleep at night, you know. Well, it's, why don't you quit the job, she says. I was a plumber prior to becoming a policeman, and I had, you know, I didn't quit the job to become, I didn't come on the police department for money because I was making a lot more than what they started at that time. I came on the job because I always wanted to be a policeman, and I felt that I could do something for the community, which I want to raise my family in. And, of course, I've found out now that I've matured more on the job, but it's not that way. I'm hoping that he's convicted, not because of who he is. I don't even know the fella. I'm not trying to put him away, and charge like this couldn't be more than just a little fine at the most anyway, but the idea is, especially after hearing this first witness testify, I mean, she's, and I'm sure the other one's going to testify the same way, of what happened to their side. First of all, I mean, I can see myself. She said she sat in the car the whole time when they got out of the car and went in there. Well, she sat in the car. How could she see everything that was going on inside? Then he came back and said, well, wasn't your door open? Well, he gave her a leading question. She had to tell him then, yes, the door was open and I could hear. Well, the door in the filling station was closed. I mean, we'd had been shouting in there for her to hear out through that glass door. Second, she said I was the officer who sat in front of her house, hard white power. Well, first of all, I consider myself as a professional police officer. I don't go around doing juvenile things like this. And knowing the tension already in that area, I'm not going to incite a riot myself, not when I'm solo by myself. He got up, the defense attorney, and told the jury that Mr. Watson's human. No matter if he is a Negro, he's human, and he don't want to be called a dirty black nigger. Well, first of all, he wasn't called that. But second, I'm human too. I'm a police officer, sure. But does that make me different than you or anyone else? I'm human. If Mr. Watson gets cut, he bleeds red blood. If I get cut, I bleed red blood. He hurts, I hurt. If it's bad enough, he goes to the doctor, I go to the doctor. They call me a pig. I'll take, I mean, if that's the worst thing I'm ever called is a pig, I mean, I'll accept that. But I feel that verbal abuse to the matter of saying pigs and you rotten white pigs and things like that, I think that is getting abusive, and I felt that we took it pretty good. I feel we take it every day good. It wasn't harassment, that we were doing our job, and he's going to have to act like a John Doe citizen. He can't go out there and break the laws. I asked him for his driver's license. I don't have to show him to you. Was that right? I mean, you don't have to show me his driver's license because he's Lauren Watson? I mean, if I stopped you, you're not going to say, I don't have to show you. I mean, I work for National Education Television. I don't have to show you my license. Am I going to say, okay, I'll see you? So, I mean, that's the point. I mean, that's the reason I'd like to see him convicted, just to show that he's not, he's Mr. Watson, I'm Mr. Cantwell.
And Cantwell lost the balance. Did you fight him at all? No, like, it was too late. You have no intention at that point of resisting arrest? Is that correct?
Ma'am, I dislike very much, if there's any way to avoid it, to mispronounce a person's name. I think it's discourteous to do so. I wonder if you would very slowly and carefully tell me what your last name is so I can try to pronounce it correctly and not offend you by mispronouncing it.
Mpasele.
Haley?
Mpasele.
Mpasele?
Just call me Terry.
Terry, all right then. Now, I believe you did say that you're from the Union of South Africa. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you a foreign student here in this country?
Yes, I am.
And where are you going to school?
Temple Buell.
Temple
College.
Buell. And may I ask how long you've been here, please?
This is my 3rd year.
Are you, what is your major course of interest, or your major, in other words?
Sociology.
Sociology. I gathered from your testimony that you are acquainted with the defendant, Mr. Loren Watson.
I am.
How long have you known him?
Almost a year now.
How close a friend of Mr. Watson's are you? And by that I mean, how often do you see him?
About after every 2 weeks, maybe.
All right. Do you have some area of common interest with which you associate with Mr. Watson?
Yes, relatively.
All right. May I inquire, what is the nature of your common interest with Mr. Watson?
I believe in his philosophy.
You believe in his philosophy. Would you care to tell us what that is?
Well, whether she would care to or not, Your Honor, I would object. What does Mr. Watson's philosophy have to do, whether or not a police officer harried him down a street?
Now who's making the speeches, Your Honor?
All right, gentlemen. The question, are you making an objection, Mr. Davies? All right.
Totally irrelevant.
The objection to asking this witness what Mr. Watson's philosophy is a proper objection and will be sustained.
Very well, Terry. I'll ask you, what is your philosophy that you find that you have in common with Mr. Watson?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Do I understand, Terry, that you and Mr. Watson believe in a number of the same things? Is that why you're friends?
Yes, and we're 2 human beings.
And you're 2
Uh-huh.
human beings. I assume this. May I ask, what are the items of belief that you have in common with Mr. Watson that makes you and he such friends?
Same objection, Your Honor. It's just another way of asking what the... I see no relevancy to the issues in this case in that question. None whatsoever.
Yes. Your Honor, can the court seriously believe that a person who has a strong belief in an ideology that this would not affect their credibility? This is certainly proper with respect.
Wait a second,
If necessary, I'd like to take a recess and get some law to support my position.
No, wait a second. Just a second, please. I intend to run this court and not let either one of you do it, all right? I'm not going to have a mistrial after 3 days, and that's just what you're hitting for. And I'm going to have to grant a mistrial if there's some problems on this line. Generally, you may ask questions to find out whether, in fact, whether she would, in fact, misstate because of her acquaintanceship. I don't think that because these 2 happen to be members of the same organization, which they probably are. All right, before. This is what it may go to. Do it generally without going into what this philosophy is or what this organization is.
Don't you think, Your Honor, that a showing of a common philosophy and a showing of what the philosophy is has something to do with credibility? If you both belong to the country club, probably no. If you both belong to an organization that advocates violence, yes. Or if you belong to the same church, it could have a bearing on your credibility. I'm concerned about showing how close or how casual her acquaintanceship is.
Well, she told you she sees him every 2 weeks.
Then ask questions going to this rather than specific philosophies or specific organizations. I will show your objections on the record, but I will sustain the objections.
Now, Terry, I understand from your testimony that you see Mr. Watson socially about at least every couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this has occurred during the last year?
Yes.
Other than an interest in common ideas, do you have any other basis of friendship with Mr. Watson?
I don't understand your question.
I believe you testified that you're a friend of his because you believe in some of the same things, and without going into what these same things are, do you have any other basis of friendship with Mr. Watson other than this belief in this common belief in similar ideas?
No, I don't think
That's
so.
the only basis of your friendship.
Yes.
Now, on the date in question, November the 6th, you were at Mr. Watson's house along with Mr. Watson and his wife and some other persons. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And were you going up to wherever the defendant Watson was going to make his speech on that day? Were you going up with him?
Yes, I was.
I see.
We had planned to leave about 9 o'clock.
About 9 o'clock. All right. And did you ever go to, where were you going, Fort Collins?
Yes, that's right.
Did you ever get there?
No, we didn't.
Uh-huh. And what time did you go over to Mr. Watson's house on that day?
I got to Mr. Watson's house about 9 o'clock, exactly 9.
I see. And what time did you leave Watson's house finally?
I know I got to Mr. Watson's house at exactly 9 o'clock.
All right.
But as for the time that we left, it must have been around from 9:15 to 9:30.
Could it have been as late as 10 o'clock, do you think?
It could have been.
Do you think it could have been as late as 10:30?
No.
So it was at least not any later than 10 o'clock, you're telling us.
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Now, was the first time you saw the officer the time when he allegedly shook his fist and hollered white power?
Yes.
That was the first time, around 9:15 to 9:30. Did he stop his car in front of the house when he shouted this out, or just drive by slowly, or how did it happen?
He drove by very slowly.
Was Watson outside the house when this happened?
Yes, he was.
What was the location where Officer Cantwell told Watson, as I understand you said, quote, Watson, it looks like you're not going to make your speech today. What was the location where that event occurred?
At the alley behind Mr. Watson's house.
Oh, right at his house. Right behind his house.
In the alley.
Now, was that on the second or the third time he came by? Or was that the first time?
I can't remember precisely whether it was the first or the second trip.
Was it the same time he slowed down and said, white power?
No, it was not.
Well, then it was at least the second or the third time, wasn't it?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Redirect, Mr. Davies.
Terry, as a point of clarification, now, Terry, you indicate that you recall arriving at Mr. Watson's house at 9 in the morning, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Why do you recall that time?
Because I knew it was very important for Mr. Watson to be there. And I wanted very much to be there, too.
So you made a point of being there at 9 o'clock. Now then, the other times that you've discussed in your cross-examination are all approximate times on your part, aren't they?
Yes.
The best that you can recall over a 5-month period, and you didn't look at your watch at that time and check each, note the time every time something happened. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. So you could be 10, 15, 20 minutes off in your estimates, possibly.
Your Honor,
Isn't that correct?
The objection is that this is
I have no
redirected,
further
not
questions, Your Honor.
cross-examination, Will.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Well, I take it the last question's withdrawn then?
Take whatever you want.
The last question will be ignored since it is not, since it is a leading question, unless you wish to restate it, the form not leading. Did you wish to ask another question, Mr. Dean?
No, that's all, Your Honor.
Did you have any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may have a seat.
Call Mr. Jim Galloway.
Is Mr. Galloway outside? All right. Would you call him in, please?
Somebody call Oscar. State your name and address, please.
Willie James Galloway, 2417 Glen.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Galloway?
I own a service station on 34th and Franklin.
34th and Franklin.
Right.
Directing your attention, Mr. Galloway, to the 6th day of November in the morning, late morning hours. Were you...
Well, as I recall, Mr. Watson, he drove up to the station in front of the pump, and he got out, came inside, and got on the phone, and just as he got inside, about 3 police cars pulled up on the lot, and about 2 or 3 of them caught him by the arm and turned him around. And before they get him turned around good, the lot was full with about 6 or 7 other cars.
Were you inside other police cars, you mean? Were you inside the station all this time, Mr. Galloway?
Yes, I were.
Now, you say that Mr. Watson was on the phone and about 3 officers came in and grabbed him?
Yes, he did.
What did they do to him then?
Well, one of them was holding his arm, and another one was saying something. I don't recall what he was saying.
Do it.
Right.
Was Mr. Watson struggling with him?
No.
Did you
Not to
see
me.
Mr. Watson attack them in any way?
No, I didn't.
Did you see Mr. Watson swing his arms at them?
No.
From your understanding of the situation, it appeared they were trying to arrest Mr. Watson?
Yes, they were, I guess.
From your observation of the situation, Mr. Galloway, did Mr. Watson in any way try and resist that arrest?
No, not in any way that I could see. He wasn't trying to resist it.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination this morning.
What did Mr. Watson do when the officers came in the gas station?
What did he do?
Yeah, describe what you saw Watson do.
He turned around as though he was surprised when they caught him by the arm.
What did he do then?
Nothing but stand there.
Just stood there like that. Did he say anything?
No, I really don't know.
Were you standing right there with him?
No, I wasn't.
Where were you?
About 6 feet away from him.
Was there anybody between you and Mr. Watson?
No, there wasn't. No one but the police.
No one but the police.
Right.
Were there police between you and Mr.
There
Watson?
was police all over the station.
Well, when I asked if there was anybody... You suppose it's possible to have examination without encouragement from the audience, Your Honor?
Your Honor, I think if Mr. Morgan would refrain from asking questions that are going to evoke a humorous response, then we're not going to have...
They're not humorous questions, Your Honor. It's serious.
Well, let me just say this. I would ask the spectators, you're very welcome to be here. I would ask you to refrain from exclamations. If it is impossible, you will have to leave the courtroom. Let's continue with the cross-examination.
Well, Mr. Galloway, maybe we didn't understand each other when I asked the last question. Let me go back. My question was there anybody, any person between, or persons between you and Watson at the time that the officers came in and placed a hand on him. Now, you understand the question?
No, it wasn't.
There was nobody.
No.
And then I thought you said after that, nobody except police officers. Were there police officers between you and Watson?
Well, when they came in, when 3 people's around someone, they got to get between me and him and 6 feet away from him.
So there were some persons, if we include police officers in the category of people, there were police officers between you and Watson. Is that true?
Right.
All right. Well, that was what I meant, including police officers as people. Then, at the time that the officer or officers took hold of Watson's arm, were you able to see what happened, or were there some police officers between you and Watson at the time this happened?
Yes, I was able to see most everything that did happen there.
And you were only 6 feet away?
Right.
All right. You didn't hear him call the officers pigs?
No, I didn't.
Did you see Watson from the time that the first police officer put a hand on him to the time that they got him out to the police car?
Yes, I did.
You didn't miss any of it?
Sure didn't.
And at no time did he struggle? You know what I mean by struggle, don't you? You know, try to get away from him?
No, he didn't struggle.
Did you see him put handcuffs on him?
Yes.
Did it look to you like he was cooperating with them in putting handcuffs on him?
Well, they got him on him, and after you get him on, ain't no sense in struggling.
Well, he didn't try to stop him from putting the handcuffs on him. Is that
No,
right?
he didn't.
When Watson came in the station, were you inside at that time?
Yes, I were.
How many people came in with him?
He came in by himself, and shortly after police came in, there's 2 or 3 others came in after those.
How many officers came in?
At first, it was 3 in there. And about 2 minutes after that, there was about 8 in there. And about 5 minutes after that, the whole lot was full of them.
I see. Did Mr. Watson say anything at all to any of these police officers from the first moment that a police officer came into the station until they were out of your sight and hearing? Anything that you remember at all?
Not that I can remember.
Was he just silent during the whole time, or did he say some things that you don't remember? You're conscious of him saying anything is what I'm asking, really.
Yes, he said something, but I don't know what it was.
Soft voice or loud voice?
Well, it wasn't a loud voice.
Excuse me just a minute. Thank you. I have no further questions.
And you redirect Mr. Davies.
We have no further questions, Your Honor.
No recross.
May we ask that this witness be excused? He has to get back to his...
I have no objections, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Galloway, you are excused, and you are free to leave the courtroom if you desire. Mr. Davies, did you wish to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We call the defendant, Mr. Watson.
Mr. Watson, would you please step forward? Before he's called in hold, you can introduce how to that.
Would you state your name and address, please?
Lauren Ralph Watson, 2835 Welton Street.
Mr. Watson, are you the defendant in the case on trial here today?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Watson, directing your attention to the 6th day of November, 1968, and specifically to the address you've mentioned, 2835 Welton. Did you on that day have occasion to see one Officer Cantwell of the Denver Police Department?
Yes, I did.
Would you relate to us, please, under what circumstances you saw him and what events transpired up until the time you were arrested and placed in a police car at 34th and Franklin on that day?
Yes, I was coming out of the front door of my home and observed Officer Cantwell in front of the house. He was waving his fist, shouting white power and something about the election's over, we're going to get 2 niggers now.
Go on.
I went back in the house, through the house to the back, came out the back door. The car was backed in the yard. I got in the car with several people that I had with me. And about that time, Officer Cantwell had come to the alley. Was coming through the alley. I pulled up as to the, I guess about 10 feet from the alley. Cantwell blocked the drive. And waved his fist again, said something, you're not going to be making any speeches today, Watson. Called me a couple of names, I don't remember exactly. Racial description. I backed the car back up into the yard, or further back into the yard, stopped, sat there a couple of minutes trying to decide what to do. In the meantime, Officer Cantwell came back down the alley and slowed and waved his fist again. Said something, I'm not sure what he said that time. Pulled off down the alley towards 29th. I pulled off behind him, 30, maybe 40 feet. And he turned left out of the alley as I was approaching the sidewalk at the alley. And I stopped and I observed him beginning a left-hand turn onto California Street. And as he pulled up California Street, I proceeded out into the Sir Cantwell was right on my bumper. I crossed when the light turned green, pulled off. Sir Cantwell ran into the back of the car again. And he turned his light on again. I stopped. I got out. And he got out of his car and came up to the door. And I asked him again, what was going on. He said, just going to give you a little harassment this morning, Watson. I said, am I going to be arrested? He said, no. I got back in the car again. Light, I believe, was green at 32nd and Downing. Went on across down to 34th.
You said Downing, were you on?
I mean, not Downing, Marion Street. Light was green at 34th. I signaled for a right-hand turn. Made the turn. Crossed Lafayette Street. Officer Cantwell ran into the back of the car again. proceeded to the service station on 34th and Franklin. Pulled into the drive. Officer Cantwell pulled into the drive behind me. Got out, went into the station, and called your office. I believe they said, I believe I talked to your secretary. And certainly about 2, 3 police officers. Officer Cantwell, Officer Frazzini, another police officer, grabbed me. One of them had his arm around my neck. 2 on each arm. 1 on each arm, rather. They forced my hands behind my back and put the handcuffs on me. Sort of a short chain on the handcuffs, and started jerking me out the door. Had the car keys with me. They fell on the floor, and Marvin bent over to pick them up, and I saw him disappear under a crowd of officers. And about that same time, Cantwell, Frazzini almost jerked me off my feet. And he would take a slow step and then a fast step, jerking the handcuffs, trying to cut my wrists up, I guess. And
When you get out of your car at the service station, did you hear Officer Cantwell say anything to you?
no,
Did they say anything to you? Did they give you any directions when they came in and you were at the phone about placing your hands on the wall or anything to that effect?
no, nothing to that effect.
Did you say anything to them, and if so, what did you say to them?
I believe I asked them what was going on.
Did you call them any names? Or?
No, I did not. There was much name-calling by Frazzini, particularly Cantwell, a plainclothes officer, and about 3 or more who were piling into the station as I was being jerked out. They were hollering.
Were these his name calling directed towards you?
Towards myself, and I assumed toward Miss Unfalele. Call me a black bastard, a nigger, black son of a bitch. We're gonna get you. We need to kill this black bastard. Something about Frazzini or Cantwell once said something about Terry. Said something about we need to get that black bitch over there too. One of them said we'll come back and get her, or something like that.
Were you told that you were under arrest?
No.
Did you at any time attempt to resist being placed under arrest?
No.
Did you at any time engage in a struggle with the officers?
No.
Did you either kick or swing at any of the officers or attempt to lunge at some officers that were on the floor wrestling with Mr. Johnson?
No. Frazzini was, like jerking me off my feet, It was all I could do to keep my balance.
No further questions.
Cross-examination, Mr. Morgan.
Mr. Watson, what time do you think it was first time that you saw Officer Cantwell? First time he came by and shook his fist at you and shouted white power. What time was that?
I don't remember. As I said, I don't remember what time it was. I did have a watch. I don't remember ever looking at it.
You think that was closer to 9 than to 10 o'clock, though?
Your Honor, I think he's answered the question. He said he doesn't know what time it is.
I know.
He's answered the question that he doesn't know. If he can answer the question whether it was closer to 9 or 10, he may do so. If he can't, he should state.
If you can't, just say so.
I believe it was probably, well, it's really, like, difficult.
All right. Well, then, let me see if we can fix our times in this fashion. Do you know, or can you tell us approximately how much time elapsed from the time that you first saw Officer Cantwell come by your house? The very first time he cruised by slowly and shook his fist and hollered white power, to the first time that he stopped you on the street after you finally left. Now, these are the two times. How much time do you think elapsed between those two events? As near as you can tell us. I realize you didn't have a stopwatch out there.
10 minutes.
All right, sir. You live at 2835 Welton Street, is that correct?
That's right.
How long have you lived there, Mr. Watson? Roughly.
6 months, roughly.
What's your occupation, Mr. Watson?
I'm unemployed.
Were you unemployed last November?
Yes, I was.
Is November the 6th of 1968 the first occasion upon which you had any contact with Officer Cantwell that you know of?
No, it was not. Well, it's really, like, difficult.
All right. Well, then, let me see if we can fix our times in this fashion. Do you know, or can you tell us approximately how much time elapsed from the time that you first saw Officer Cantwell come by your house? The very first time he cruised by slowly and shook his fist and hollered white power, to the first time that he stopped you on the street after you finally left. Now, these are the two times. How much time do you think elapsed between those two events? As near as you can tell us. I realize you didn't have a stopwatch out there.
10 minutes.
All right, sir. You live at 2835 Welton Street, is that correct?
That's right.
How long have you lived there, Mr. Watson? Roughly.
6 months, roughly.
What's your occupation, Mr. Watson?
I'm unemployed.
Were you unemployed last November?
Yes, I was.
Is November the 6th of 1968 the first occasion upon which you had any contact with Officer Cantwell that you know of?
No, it was not.
Without going into any details, can you tell me when the next time immediately prior to November 6th was that you had contact with Mr. with Officer Cantwell?
Officer Cantwell stopped me 7 times prior to that, sometimes twice in the same day, and once or twice at night, maybe, I'm not sure. He's very familiar. Every time he sees me, he stops me. He asks for my driver's license. I give it to him. He calls me a few choice names.
You're absolutely certain that this same police officer sitting right here at council table stopped you at least 6 to 7 times before this November 6th event. Is that your testimony?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
He's, I was, after the second or third time, another police officer told me to
I didn't ask you what somebody else told you,
him.
Mr. Watson. I just asked you how many times he stopped you, and your testimony 6 or 7 times?
I was explaining, why I remembered the officer. You asked me why I remembered him. I was explaining I remembered him not only because he stopped me, because police officers told me to watch out for him because he was kind of psychotic.
Mr. Watson, were you acquainted with the police officer that allegedly made this last statement that you've testified to? Do you know who told you that?
Not by name.
In other words, would it be fair for me to ask you if you think that Officer Cantwell is persecuting you?
It would be fair for you to ask. I would have to say that,
No, I'm asking you what you think.
do I think he is persecuting me?
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes a little bit beyond that. I think persecution is kind of a mild understatement.
Oh, well, tell us. What do you think he is trying to do to you?
Well, he threatened 2 or 3 times, like, to kill me, shoot me in the back of the head, things like this. And I believe he's probably trying to provoke me into resisting him or something like that, which he stated himself was part of the plan.
Part of the plan?
Yeah.
His plan or whose plan?
He said, one time he said our plan, one time he said his plan.
Did he elaborate on this plan? Did he tell you really what he intended to do to you?
Yeah, he said he intended, like, to get rid of me.
Did he ever tell you why?
Because he said I was a uppity nigger.
That's what he told you?
That's what he told me.
That's the only reason he ever gave you for this persecution, is that it?
I remember that was one of the reasons stuck in my mind. That was the first time he called me an uppity nigger, and that's why.
Did he give you any other reasons for persecuting you?
There may have been reasons to him.
Well, that's what I mean. Did he express any other reasons, whether they were valid or not? Did he express any other reasons for persecuting you or threatening to kill you?
Other than the fact that, he thought, I think he described it as, his duty, to, particularly after the election, if he wasn't able to do so before, to get rid of uppity niggers in the community.
Oh, I see. Now, Mr. Watson, this event that occurred in the service station, did either you or Officer Cantwell say anything to each other during the what's been described variously as a struggle or not a struggle, but in any event, the event which resulted in you being handcuffed and taken out, did you say anything to Officer Cantwell, or did he say anything to you at that time that you remember?
I remember asking generally of the officers that were present what was going on. Officer Cantwell, I believe, at that time said, I told you you weren't going to make any speech today. And when he or one of the other officers had his arm around my neck. Stated something about, let's kill this black bastard now.
What time are you supposed to be in Fort Collins to give the speech?
Noon, I believe.
It's an hour's drive up there, isn't it?
No, I think that depends on the weather conditions.
Was it snowing November the 6th?
I don't believe it was.
Good weather, wasn't it?
No, I wouldn't say in terms of, you mean good weather in terms of the sun shining or good weather?
The streets were dry, weren't they?
The streets seem fairly dry in our area. As far as the highway, I have no idea.
And
Thank you, Mr. Watson. You may have a seat.
I'm sorry, did you say something?
Defense rest, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Morgan, the defense is rested. Do you wish to present any rebuttal evidence?
I do, Your Honor. I had some witnesses lined up for tomorrow. I don't think that they're available in time this afternoon. It'd probably take I don't know. I'd have to I seriously doubt if I could get my first witness here in less than 20 minutes. I anticipated
Why don't we take a very short recess?
I suppose we could take a short recess and discuss this out of the presence of the jury.
Court will be in recess for just a very few minutes. We will reconvene shortly.
Please rise for the recess.
We'll wait a second.
Since we've been working with Leonard, we find that most of the judges and most of the district attorneys don't even know anything about the law, period. And that they find themselves like just completely out of it. It's been so easy for them to convict black people that they don't even get together and, with their witnesses or anything and discuss any trial strategy or anything. They just go in there and present themselves in their blue uniforms and the DA and waves the flag and they send the guy on up the hill. And Leonard has forced them to deal with law, and they don't know anything about law. The judges don't, the DAs don't, and the police don't, and neither of the three, could give a damn anyway.
Oh, I think that it's the defense of Lauren Watson is a civil rights question. Oh, unquestionably. I think that we can't ignore the fact that there's a significant political question here. There's a significant political battle going on. Well, if the courts are not a good place to fight this battle, then the streets are going to be the place where this battle's fought. And frankly, I have a great faith and great belief in our system of justice. And I hope to God that we can fight these questions in the courts rather than in the streets. And in fact, I would say that if we don't fight these questions in the courts, if we as lawyers don't take a stand and attempt to bring about social change, social reform, equal justice, if we don't attempt to eliminate what is in effect a system of class justice in this country, and of which Lauren Watson and the people he represents are victims, if we don't change this through the courts, through the lawyers going in and convincing juries every time they have an opportunity of the existence of this situation, then the result is, I think, going to be anarchy and civil war.
I think we got a lousy case.
Oh, I do too.
Especially the registration, I turned the car over to him. And that was it, no arrest or anything else. Well, then actually there wasn't even any problem the first time. He found somebody else driving his car. The guy said it was Watson's car. He said, call Watson. He turned the car over to him and let him go. And that's it.
There you go.
Well, maybe we'll go into that.
have a problem. Please rise for a reconvene at this time. You may be seated.
Ready for rebuttal evidence, Mr. Morgan?
Yes, Your Honor, I have one witness I can call in rebuttal this evening. I'll call Officer Cantwell in rebuttal.
Now, Officer Cantwell, it's been several days since you were put under oath. You understand that you still are under oath in this case and sworn to tell the truth.
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Would you resume the witness stand?
Officer Cantwell, do you know where you were at approximately 9:45 a.m. on November 6th, 1968?
Yes, I do, sir.
Where were you?
I was at Juvenile Hall.
Do you have any way of ascertaining the exact time when you were at certain spots on that date?
Yes, I do, sir.
Are you using something to refresh your recollection as to time?
Yes, I ran a copy of the booking in slip.
And would you refer to that record to ensure accuracy and after refreshing your recollection by reference, tell the jury where you were at, let's say, 10 o'clock first? 10 a.m. on November the 6th.
I was at Juvenile Hall with the juvenile that I arrested approximately 9:30 that morning.
All right. More specifically, Officer Cantwell, between the hours of 9 and 10 a.m. on November the 6th of 1968, I'll ask you specifically, were you anywhere near 2835 Welton Street?
At which time, sir?
Between 9 and 10 a.m. on November 6, 1968.
No, I was not.
I'll also, to make sure there's no misunderstanding, ask you specifically if on the occasion of your contact with the defendant Watson, without the necessity of repeating the alleged slurring comments made, if you called the defendant Watson any of the derogatory terms that have been testified to. We don't have to repeat them, but did you call him any of those names?
No, I did not, sir.
All right, now, the defendant Watson testified that you had contact with him at least 6 to 7 times prior to November 6, 1968. I'll ask you, is this true?
No, sir, it is not.
Had you ever had any contact with defendant Watson?
I talked to him one other occasion, yes, sir.
And is it correct that that occasion was that a friendly contact?
What do you mean by friendly?
Well, it didn't result in an arrest or anything like
sir.
that.
No, sir, it was not.
What was the occasion? It didn't involve an arrest. It's not derogatory. What was it?
There was no arrest. There was a citation issued to another party. This was, I was working nights. It was during the disturbance, and we had stopped a vehicle which was on a pickup, and we stopped the vehicle, me and my partner, and this other party driving the car had no driver's license or no registration card to the vehicle, at which time I asked him who the car belonged to, and he stated Mr. Watson. And I stated if he didn't want the car towed to the pound, would he please get Mr. Watson to respond to the scene, and I would turn the car over to Mr. Watson, which Mr. Watson did.
And did you turn the car over to him?
Yes, we did, yes.
Was that the extent of your contact with Mr. Watson?
That's it.
Have you ever had any other contact or conversation with Mr. Watson on other than what you've just now related with respect to turning his car over to him on any other occasion other than November 6, 1968?
That's it.
Have you ever, did you hear Watson's testimony that you had threatened to kill him?
Yes, I did.
Have you ever made any kind of threats against defendant Watson?
To him or no one else.
I have no further questions, you may.
Yeah, well, I noticed that you refreshed your memory with some notes there. May I see them, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Now, you indicate that what you were refreshing your memory from this for the purpose of indicating that, according to this, this person you took to juvenile hall was admitted on the 6th of November at 10 a.m. Is that right?
The time on there is the time that the juvenile authorities, or the you may say the juvenile person working at juvenile hall, started his card out, and that's the time that he started the card. Is 10 a.m.
Well, you didn't put this 10 a.m. on here.
No, I did not.
I see. And you were present when he did?
Yes, I was.
All right. Part of your duties as a police officer is to keep a log of your time, right?
Yes, it is.
Log your calls, log the places when you respond to calls, and so forth and so on. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
All right. Now, where were you at 3:30 that afternoon?
3:30 that afternoon?
Exactly 3:30 that afternoon.
That afternoon?
Yeah.
I was home in bed, I hope.
You don't know for sure, do you?
No.
How about 7 o'clock that night?
I have no idea.
How about 6:15?
I don't carry a log sheet at home.
Most people don't, do they?
No, they do not.
In other words, most people have to, after a 4-month lapse, have to approximate the time, right?
Yes, they do.
Right. So, and it's sometimes quite difficult when you're not, in fact, logging time to be off for 30, 45 minutes sometimes in the approximation of what you do. Isn't that right?
Not while I'm working, no, sir.
No, because you log it down.
That's right.
But people that you deal with who aren't working, in other words, all the people you arrest don't have a log sheet, do they?
No, sir.
They write it down, right?
That's
They
right.
have to approximate what time it was.
That's right, yes, sir.
Officer Cantwell, when you left juvenile hall, where did you go?
I was responding back to my district.
Well, specifically, though.
I came down.
What street did you take?
I took 29th, I think it's 28th Street, and runs into 28th Avenue, and it curves to 30th Street. And I was coming in towards town on California Street when I received a call by the dispatcher, which could be verified by the tapes, from another officer to assist him at 24th and Glenarm Street. And that is the reason I was making my left-hand turn onto 29th Street at the time I observed this vehicle, which was unknown to me at that time to be Mr. Watson, coming out of the alley at a high rate of speed.
And what time was that?
About approximately 10:05 a.m.
He was stopped at 10:05.
Yes, sir, that's right.
Now, you're familiar with that area. How many blocks is it from Juvenile Hall to 29th in California?
I could draw you a picture if you wish.
Well, why don't you just count them on your fingers or whatever
Well,
technique you use?
I'm not familiar with the area that much either.
Well, draw a mental picture and count the blocks for me.
I suppose 3, 4 at the most.
4.
At the most 4, probably.
4 blocks. And then it's how many blocks from there back to 29th and Downing by the route you followed behind Mr. Watson?
I'd say 4 blocks.
Total of about 8 blocks.
Total, yes, sir.
Any traffic lights?
In which way?
Well, either way.
Yes, there is.
All right, coming from the hall to 29th.
Tonight, I want him here tomorrow morning at 9:30.
In which way?
You get home
Where you were at 10
Get
a.m.
home to tell him to 10
29th in
o'clock tomorrow.
California. How many stops?
1.
Try.
How many stops?
Gee, I'd have to go out there and retrace it.
There's a light when
I'm
you...
sure there's one at 29th or 30th in California.
And we can presume you stopped there.
Pardon?
We can presume that you stopped for that stop sign.
Yes, sir.
Was the light red or green when you went through it?
I don't recall that.
If you were stopped, if you got to a light just as it was changing, how long would you have the red light before you could go on?
They're all different in the city and county of Denver.
Well, that particular light,
Oh,
do you know?
I don't know. I'd say most probably 60 seconds. I have no idea.
Okay. But you don't, well, you see it. So it is important that we remember whether or not you had that light red or green.
It's
So you've covered 8 blocks with some lights involved in 5 minutes.
That's right. I was chasing a party too at one.
Well, but he wasn't speeding. You've already said that. And we want to, if you took a minute out for that light, I think it tends to...
You said a minute.
You said it.
I said 60 seconds.
Oh, well, excuse me just a minute. Is 60 seconds the same as a minute? All right. 60 seconds. So, we're down to 4 minutes. So that's why I've been curious about whether or not you stopped at that line. You don't remember whether you stopped at the light, Officer Cantwell?
No, I do not, Mr. Davies.
Is there a light on Welton Street between 29th and, are there any lights between 29th and Welton and 29th and Marion and the route that you took?
Yes, there is.
Were those lights all green during this chase?
Yes, they was.
They were all green?
Yes, they were.
All right. And no further questions.
How long has he been up there? Just a few minutes.
Any regret?
I have no further evidence from this witness, Your Honor, and I have no further witnesses that I can present this evening.
All right, you had no recross-examination, Mr. Davies.
None, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Officer Cantwell. You may have a seat. You intend to call additional witnesses in the morning, is this correct?
Yes, Your Honor. I intend to call one or possibly two witnesses tomorrow, and that's all.
All right. We will recess the court then for the day.
We don't win or lose the cases. We present the evidence, and the judge or the jury decides it, but it's not the same thing as when you're defending. When a man pays you $500 or $100 to go in and defend him on a specific charge, then you win or lose. But when you prosecute maybe 200 cases in a month, the prosecutor doesn't, in my opinion, win or lose the case. He does a good or a poor job in presenting the case, and that's why we don't have a personal involvement. Everybody likes to win in the sense of reaching the goalpost, maybe, if it's your goalposts.
The city is not as well represented as a wealthy client. City attorney is a very experienced prosecutor because he prosecutes a lot of cases. He knows what questions to ask. He knows some of the officers. He knows that the police officers are going to be good witnesses because they are professional witnesses. But he is not prepared. He hasn't worked up the case. He can't with 8 trials for 930. The defense attorney with one case to defend who thoroughly prepares this case is in a much better position. He has his witnesses lined up. He has gone over their testimony with them, so he knows what they are going to say. He has anticipated perhaps some of the city's arguments, and I think a good defense attorney is in a much better position. And this is just one of the problems we have in a city court with high volume, a high volume court. We always have a situation where we have lots of cases set for trial, and the city attorney really starts thinking about them 5 minutes before trial or 10 minutes before trial.
The judge has fairly outlined the problem of the lawyers who appear before her. But what of her own problems? She's already had to make a couple of dozen rulings on the spot, each of which could conceivably be the basis for a reversal. To some extent, she's in the same position as the policeman. She has to make quick judgments, tough decisions, often under pressure. She's on trial professionally, too. She realizes that if she makes a mistake that leads to reversal, this whole thing is going to have to be done all over again. So the system depends not only on the competence of the lawyers, but on the competence of the judge as well. Tomorrow, the judge will sort out the legal issues and send the case to the jury.